Welcome to The Explainer. So whenever we talk about the quote-unquote great American novel, Herman Melville's Moby-Dick is almost always the very first title that comes up. But let's be honest, for a lot of people, this book is like a massive, kind of intimidating iceberg. I mean, most of us know the tip of it, right? The thrilling story of a crazy captain relentlessly chasing a giant white whale. But just beneath the surface, there's this colossal structure built out of true crime survival stories, completely bizarre 19th century science, really deep biblical theology, and shockingly modern environmental philosophy. So my goal today is to break down that iceberg for you. Okay, let's dive into this. To understand how this masterpiece was built, we're going to use a zoom-in, zoom-out approach. Here is our roadmap. We'll start with the real whale ship Essex, then the cetology of Moby-Dick, followed by biblical character archetypes, themes of fates and defiance, and finally, a modern eco-critical perspective. All right, Section 1, the real whale ship Essex. Now, before Moby-Dick was a work of fiction, it was actually rooted in a terrifying, very real historical event. Back in August 1819, the whale ship Essex set sail from Nantucket. But guys, this wasn't just your standard shipwreck. It was a grueling, unbelievable 96-day nightmare. In November 1820, thousands of miles out in the Pacific Ocean, the ship was literally attacked and sunk by a massive 85-foot sperm whale. By December, the desperate crew managed to land on the uninhabited Henderson Island. Fast forward to January, they had to take to their tiny whaleboats again, eventually separating in the vast ocean. Extreme starvation set in, and by the time the very few survivors were finally rescued in February of 1821, they had endured unimaginable horrors, ultimately even resorting to cannibalism just to stay alive. But what truly captured Melville's imagination wasn't just the survival story itself. It was exactly how the ship sank. The first mate of the Essex, a man named Owen Chase, wrote that the whale appeared with tenfold fury and vengeance in his aspect, and again struck the ship. Think about that. A whale attacking a ship with calculated vengeance? That was completely unheard of. It felt deeply personal. And it was that specific idea, an unstoppable, vengeful Leviathan, that really ignited the legend of Moby-Dick. Moving right along to Section 2, the cetology of Moby-Dick. Now, you might be thinking, if Melville had just written a straight-up thriller, it would have been a fantastic adventure story. But he did something weird. He anchored this incredibly violent reality with a quirky, almost encyclopedic structure. In Chapter 32, which is aptly titled Cetology, our narrator Ishmael completely pauses the adventure to ask a really fundamental question. How do you categorize a Leviathan? Because actual 19th century scientific knowledge on whales was, well, pretty sparse. So Ishmael borrows this brilliant, slightly ridiculous analogy from the world of bookbinding to categorize these massive creatures. He literally categorizes whales into books. First, you have the folio. These are the absolute largest whales, like the sperm whale, the species of Moby-Dick himself. Then the octavo. Those are your medium-sized whales, like the grampus, or what we'd call an orca. And finally, the duodecimo. These are the smallest whales, like the very creatively named Hazaporpoise. And critics point out that this cataloging isn't just Melville rambling. It's a genius literary device. It balances the novel's wild spiritual speculations with a rigid, matter-of-fact 19th century scientific reality. It's what keeps us grounded in the story. All right, diving deeper into the iceberg. Section 3, biblical character archetypes. So Melville actually grew up in a really strict Calvinist environment. And when he wrote this book, he pulled directly from the Bible to give his characters some serious mythic weight. He maps his captain directly to his biblical namesake, the biblical King Ahab. The king was a doomed ruler who worshipped the false idol Baal, totally ignored the true prophet Micaiah, and ended up dying in battle. Now, Melville's Captain Ahab doesn't worship Baal, but he absolutely worships the pagan spirit of fire. He flat out ignores the truthful warnings from his first mate, Starbuck, and his obsession ultimately leads to his own death, dragged down into the ocean by his own hemp rope. He is the ultimate ungodly ruler. And then we have Ishmael, our narrator. His story is a total contrast to Ahab's grim fate. The biblical Ishmael was the son of Hagar, cast out of his home to wander the harsh desert wilderness where God miraculously saves him. Our narrator Ishmael, also an outcast. He's suffering from a deep depression, so he casts himself into what he calls the wilderness of water. But instead of perishing out there, this lost heir archetype actually learns compassion, finds truth, and is quite literally saved by a floating coffin. You know, we absolutely can't forget the crew caught in the middle of all this. First mate Starbuck directly mirrors the biblical Obadiah. Obadiah was a genuinely good man who awed the Lord, but he silently endured King Ahab's idolatry because of his lower status. Starbuck is just like that. He's a pragmatic, devout Christian, and basically the only man who truly opposes Ahab's mad quest. But when he is finally faced with Captain Ahab's immense, concentrated evil, Starbuck is paralyzed by what Melville calls spiritual terror. He knows, absolutely knows, he needs to stop Ahab to save the ship, but he just lacks the courage to act. And sadly, that passive endurance dooms them all.
Next up, Section 4, Themes of Fate and Defiance.
So this whole clash of characters, it's really pointing to a massive philosophical battle happening right there on the deck of the Pequod. The novel is completely caught between two incredibly powerful philosophies of the time. On one hand, we have Calvinist fatalism. This is the traditional doctrine that basically says you must completely obey God's will or you are going to face destruction. But on the other side is the newly emerging philosophy of the time, Emerson's transcendentalism. This is the radical idea that man can achieve perfection through sheer self-reliance. And Captain Ahab, he perfectly represents the extreme, dark, and destructive end of that self-reliance. He boldly defies the heavens, and in doing so brings ruin to everyone, while Ishmael is the one who actually finds a balance.
And finally, Section 5, A Modern Eco-Critical Perspective. Let's zoom all the way out now. It is genuinely mind-blowing how a novel published way back in 1851 speaks so directly to our modern anxieties about the environment today. Barry Commoner's first law of ecology states that everything is connected to everything else. Modern eco-criticism looks at how literature reflects our changing perception of nature. And Melville's epic brilliantly captures that vital transition away from anthropocentrism, which is just a fancy word for the arrogant idea that humans are the center of the universe. The novel vividly shows us that humanity cannot mercilessly dominate the natural world without facing some pretty catastrophic consequences.
And this perfectly captures how we view these creatures now. Today, whales have become an incredibly important symbol of the ocean and the natural world, and they're basically impossible to ignore because of their awesome size. So Moby-Dick isn't just an adventure. It's a profound cautionary tale. Remember, the whaling industry was literally the oil industry of the 19th century. The Pequod is essentially a floating factory driven by a madman's greed. Melville is forcing us to look in the mirror and confront the devastation that we inflict on non-human species. Which leaves us with a pretty massive, provocative question. Are we still blindly chasing our own leviathans, or can we learn to coexist with the natural world before it pulls us under? Just think about how the real crew of the Essex and the fictional Captain Ahab met their brutal ends when they pushed nature just a bit too far. It's a powerful reminder that the lessons buried deep within this 1851 masterpiece are probably more relevant to our survival today than ever before. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.